A little over 5 years ago, I worked at a Chick-fil-A. I worked there for almost a year, and overall it was a decent job. Of all the fast food jobs I've worked, which is 3, Chick-fil-A was by far my favorite. However, there was one crazy event that took place that I will never forget. I was working until close one night at the Chick-fil-A. It had been a pretty busy night to that point, and was pretty typical. Finally, things started to quiet down significantly in the last hour. I was the only person left working behind the counter to take people's orders. There were a couple of people inside the dining room, maybe like 2 or 3. At about 10 minutes before closing or so, I remembered that a man walked in. I thought that he was going to go to the counter where I was and order something. Instead, though, the man turned and then walked into our dining area and kind of out of my sight. I didn't think too much of it, though. Eventually, within the next 5 minutes or so, the people who had been inside the dining room left. Now the dining room appeared empty at glance, but I knew that the man was still in there somewhere because I hadn't seen him leave. When it was time to close, one of my coworkers came over to lock the doors. I mentioned that somebody was still in there, and then I went to go find the man and tell him that we were closed and he would have to leave. After I started walking into the dining room, I had a bad feeling because I couldn't see the man anywhere. But I was telling myself that maybe he had left without me noticing. But no. As I walked farther in, I saw the man suddenly come out from behind some tables in the corner. I started to tell him that we were closed now, and at first I thought the man knew instantly what I was saying and was going to leave. Because after looking at me, he started to jog past me and seemingly go to the front of the restaurant. But he did not leave. Instead, he stopped near one of the tables towards the front and then got on top of it. I was so confused. I walked over to him and told him again that we were closed. The man didn't even acknowledge me. Instead, he just stood on top of the table and looked around. This was really weird, so I went back towards the front of the restaurant and my coworker already saw the guy. She was watching him with a confused look on her face. Then the man hopped down off the table and then jumped onto another one. He stood on that table and my coworker yelled at the man to get down. He looked at her and then leaped off the table and then knocked over a chair and then ran to another table. We both did not know what to do. The man was running around the dining room, jumping from table to table and almost doing parkour, it seemed. But this guy was no professional. In fact, a couple of times he slipped and fell and knocked over chairs. But he wasn't getting hurt at all, which I couldn't believe. He would just get right back up and keep going. We figured that we would have to call the police because the man had to be under the influence of some kind of drug. We tried to warn him, yelling that we were calling the cops if he didn't leave now, but he still ignored us. The guy ran around the place and then he stopped jumping on tables. He pivoted into then flipping the tables over. My coworker and I, as well as 2 other coworkers who had been in the back, all tried to stay away from him until the cops arrived. When they got there, they were able to stop the man's rampage and they arrested him. He was on some type of drugs. The dining room was completely messed up and we had to stay late to fix it, but overall we were glad that nobody was hurt or anything. That was the craziest thing that ever happened to me when I worked at Chick-fil-A. This happened years ago now. It's something that I want to forget, but probably won't anytime soon. I happened to be at Chick-fil-A one night with my best friend Ashley. We were just talking and sitting kind of in the back corner of the restaurant at a table. At one point, this Chick-fil-A employee came up to us. It was a guy who appeared to be around our same age. He told us how they were doing some contest, and if we signed up, we would get a gift card. The contest was to win Chick-fil-A for a year, I think, and all we had to do was enter our phone number and address and we would be entered. Ashley and I both did it, and the guy then walked away. But before leaving, he gave us these Chick-fil-A $5 gift cards. Ashley and I stayed there for a while longer and then left. Later that night, I got a text on my phone from somebody who I did not know. As you can guess, it was from the guy who I had given my number to, but I didn't know that at the time. He said hi, and I asked who it was. At that point, he sent a picture of himself. It seemed like he had a creepy smile on his face. I don't think it was supposed to be creepy, but to me it looked creepy. I realized it was the guy from the Chick-fil-A. I asked him how he got my number, but then I remembered the contest. Then he said that he didn't even work at Chick-fil-A. Realizing that I had been duped, I was pretty angry. Then he texted me something like, "My bad, oh well, but since I have your attention now, we may as well get to know each other." I said, "No, we may as well not." The guy then started to text me a bunch and asked me to hang out with him. I was angry and told him no. He tried to call me as well as FaceTime me, and I declined them both. Then the guy said that he had my address and asked when he should come over. I realized then that he did in fact have my address. I had given it to him earlier when I thought that he worked at Chick-fil-A. I told him no. I then told him that my dad lived with me and he had a bunch of guns. Then I blocked his number. I was hoping that that would deter him from coming to my house. And thankfully, I think it did, because I never saw the guy and wasn't aware of him ever coming to the house. However, I did find out that the gift cards he gave us were fake. And also, my friend Ashley said that he texted her as well, and she blocked him immediately, not knowing who he was. That guy was definitely creepy, pretending to work at Chick-fil-A like he did. I'm hoping that he didn't do that to anybody else. For a stretch of about 6 months a long time ago, I worked at a Chick-fil-A. I was a 17-year-old girl at the time, and was just about to graduate from high school. So the story really starts one time when I was working on a Saturday. I had started work in the morning and was working until sometime in the afternoon. I don't remember exactly when. But towards the end of my shift, I was working at the front counter taking orders. I saw this man start to approach me and I greeted him. Instead of ordering right away though, he just started to talk to me. The man asked me how I was doing and how work had gone. At first, I thought he was just being friendly and I was happy to answer his questions, although I did get a sort of bad feeling about him for some reason. The man continued to talk to me though and asked me more questions. He asked when I got off, and I told him that I would be off in just a few minutes. Then he started asking more personal questions. He asked if I had a boyfriend, asked if I lived around there, and he asked if I was in school. By like the 5th question, I was getting kind of weirded out by it and wondering if he was going to order. After talking to the man and answering his questions, giving as little information as possible for like 2 minutes, I asked him what he wanted to order. By now, another man had already entered and got in line behind the first guy. The man then started asking me about the menu like he had never been there before. He asked me what my favorite thing was and what the best sellers were and stuff. He talked to me about the menu for about another minute or two at least. He was asking tons of questions, and by that point somebody else was also waiting in line now, so he was holding them up. The guy was now seeming creepy to me and not just friendly. Some people are very talkative, but they're just friendly. This guy didn't come across that way. Finally, after talking to me about myself and the menu for a total of at least 5 minutes, he ordered. The guy just got a Diet Coke, and that was it. It almost made me wonder why he even came to Chick-fil-A if all he was going to do was order a Diet Coke. So the man got his order pretty quickly, and then I continued with helping the next customers. A line had formed because of the man taking so long. I was kept busy for the next 5 minutes or so taking orders from these people, but at one point I looked up and I saw the guy was still there. He was just standing by the doors drinking his Diet Coke and kind of looking at me. I kept an eye on him and he still hadn't left like 5 minutes later after that. Then I thought that maybe he was waiting for me. I got off in just a few minutes from now and I had told him that. Why else would he just be standing by the doors? It definitely looked like he was waiting for someone. I just hoped that wasn't the case. I kept working until I was finally off a very short time later. I went back and clocked out and stuff. When I went to leave the Chick-fil-A, the man was still standing right by the doors. As soon as I walked out, he turned and started walking out with me. He asked me if I was glad to be off work. I said yes, and then told the man to have a good night, indicating that we were going our separate ways. But the man did not seem happy with that. He asked if I needed a ride home, and I said no thanks, I drove. Then he asked me if I lived around there. I completely ignored his question and just said good night, and it was only like 3 p.m. Then I went to my car and didn't look back. The man thankfully did not follow me to my car or anything. When I had made it inside, I felt very relieved and could not believe how strange that was. Then I started to drive home. But when I did, the guy started to follow me. I never had the idea that he would try to follow me home. I figured he had already left. But when I began driving back, I noticed a car behind me. It was daytime, so I could sort of see pretty good who was behind the wheel, and it was the same man. I just hoped at first that it was a coincidence, but the closer I got to my house, he was still behind me. I lived in a very large neighborhood. There were tons of streets with many houses on each of them. It was a neighborhood that was easy to get lost in if you had never been there before. So when I entered the neighborhood, I did not go to my house, but just started driving around instead. I kept randomly turning and going up and down just about every street. The man stayed with me for probably the first 5 minutes or so. Then he eventually turned off and left me alone. After that, I finally went to my house and was very careful to make sure that I didn't see the guy and he was not following me. I think that the man must have realized that I knew he was following me and that I wasn't going to actually go to my house, so he gave up. That was pretty crazy looking back. I'm just thankful that I never saw him for the rest of my time working at Chick-fil-A. He was a really creepy guy. This is something that happened back when I was in high school. I was a senior at the time, and one night I was at Chick-fil-A with some of my friends. It was a very nice night, and we were sitting outside. There were 4 of us, me, Jenny, Adam, and Cole. We were sitting around talking and having a good time. It was somewhat late, maybe almost 10 p.m., so things were fairly quiet. I remember that at one point I saw this man riding his bike down the nearby street and into the parking lot for the Chick-fil-A. The guy was wearing all black and was also wearing a hat and these sort of glasses that looked like goggles. Right away, to me, he seemed kind of strange. The guy ended up riding into the parking lot and then circling it a few times. Eventually, he parked his bike. I thought that he was going to go inside or something, but he just kind of stood around by the bike. I noticed what he was doing because I was sitting at the table in an angle that faced him. I just remember that the guy was standing next to his bike for a while, but then I never really paid more attention to him because I was talking to my friends. At some point a while later, I noticed that the guy was gone. I hadn't really been paying that close of attention to him or anything, so soon after, we all left. I lived really close to the Chick-fil-A, maybe like a 5-minute drive from there. So I got in my car and I drove back home where I lived with my parents and brother. When I got back home, I went inside, and then minutes later saw the guy on the bike again. I noticed him out the front window of our house, and he was riding slowly down the street on his bike. At first, I thought that it was just a really crazy coincidence that I was seeing him again. Our street was pretty quiet most of the time, and would occasionally get bike riders, but I had never noticed this man before. I kept watching out the front window, and the guy rode his bike back a few seconds later. Before long, it appeared as though he was just kind of riding his bike back and forth in front of our house. It seemed pretty strange. I quickly dismissed the thought that he had somehow followed me or even knew who I was, though, because that seemed way too crazy and far-fetched. I certainly didn't know this guy, and I hadn't noticed him when I was driving home or anything. After watching him ride his bike back and forth in front of our house for a while, I was just about to go away. But then, I noticed him slow his bike down and then go just past our house. Then he made a right and turned into our driveway. Now this was really weird. After going into the driveway, he was out of my sight, so I moved to try to get to another window where I could see him. However, when I reached a window near the area he had gone, I didn't see anything. By this time, I knew something was up, so I went to find my parents. They were in the basement watching a movie. I told them basically what was going on. I remember that my dad came upstairs and then went outside the front door to look around. I followed him outside, and we saw the guy's bike propped up against the garage door, but the man was nowhere in sight. My dad took the guy's bike and then wheeled it to the front door and then brought it in our house. I'm not sure why. Then after we went back inside, I heard my mom say that she saw the guy in the backyard. Apparently, he had moved from behind the garage to the other end of the yard. We looked out the back windows but could no longer see him. My mom called the police at that point. For some reason, this guy was prowling around outside the house. We kept looking out the window but didn't see him. Our yard was decent sized, and we had a good amount of trees and bushes, and he could have gone into a neighbor's property as well. It also wasn't very well lit back there either. When the police got there, we reported what happened, and they looked around a little, but the guy was not found. However, we still had his bike. I remember that my dad put up an ad on Craigslist for the man to come and get his bike and explain himself. However, nobody answered the ad. I think to this day my parents still have the guy's bike. Thankfully, he never tried to break in or anything. Last year, I was working late one night. I worked at a department store that was connected to a mall. We were open pretty late, and we were the last store open in the immediate area. Surrounding us was a good number of other stores and businesses as well. So, after leaving work, I walked out to my car in the large parking lot. I was all by myself, and my car was the only one parked in that entire section of the lot. It was kind of far from the building, and as I was making my way towards it, I saw a woman kind of walking towards me. She was also a good distance away, coming from the opposite direction. She appeared to have come from another nearby parking lot that was connected, but separated by some trees and bushes. I wasn't quite sure where she was going or who she was, but I kept walking to my car. Eventually, as we both got closer, I heard the woman say hi, and then she started to wave at me. She asked me to wait, so I did not get in my car, and I asked her what was up. She approached me and then said that she was having car problems nearby and really needed some help. Now, I know a little bit about cars, but not that much. I can jump start a car and I can change a tire, and sometimes I can have an idea of what's wrong with a car, but other than that, I don't know a whole lot. The woman overall came across as friendly though, and seemed like she genuinely needed help. I asked her first if she knew what was wrong with her car, and she said no, and it wouldn't start. Then I asked her where her car was. She told me that it was in the Chick-fil-A parking lot not too far away. I couldn't see the lot, but I knew where the Chick-fil-A was. It was pretty close by and separated by some trees and sort of on the edge of the property. The woman also claimed that her phone was dead. I asked her if she wanted to use my phone to call her road service. She asked me if I could take a look at her car and get an idea of what was wrong with it, because she knew absolutely nothing about cars. Then she wanted to call her road service after that. I agreed and followed the woman to the end of the parking lot and up a short grass hill and beyond some trees. We made it to the Chick-fil-A parking lot, which was almost completely empty. There was just one car that sat in a space, and it was a silver 4-door sedan that looked to be about 10 years old. We got to the car and started to look at it. The hood was open, but I was more interested in trying to start the car to see what kind of noise it made, if any. The woman walked over to the hood, and as I asked her to try to start the car, I noticed something. Beyond the car, about 50 feet away at the end of the parking lot, there was a man hiding in the bushes. The guy was blending in pretty good, and I feel lucky that I even saw him, but he was kind of watching us. I kind of zoned out for a second when I noticed him. The woman then told me to get inside of the passenger seat and she would try to start it. I interrupted her and quietly said, "Who's the guy in the bushes?" She stopped talking, and without even looking, she said, "What? There's no guy in the bushes." I told her to look, and I glanced in the direction of the guy. She looked right over there for a good 5 seconds, and then said that there was nobody there. She seemed very confident about it, and that seemed suspicious. Then she told me again to get in the car and she would try starting it. I just started walking away. I felt like I had been set up. As I left, the woman yelled at me to come back. I did not though. I continued to the end of the parking lot. As I was doing so, I looked to the bushes and saw the man emerging. He then started to run straight for me at about full speed. I took off running and was maybe 50 feet ahead of him. I left the parking lot, went back down the small grass hill, and got into the large mall parking lot. I sprinted all the way back to my vehicle, got inside, and left. I was able to make it with some time to spare before the man could reach my car. He never got to me, and I drove away and left and reported it to the police. I'm pretty sure that the man and woman easily left though before the cops got there. Looking back, I'm really thankful that I saw the guy when I did. Had I not, who knows what could have happened.